I'm Sharon Ross with Capital City Arts Initiative. We're here in the Courthouse Gallery and the Two Views exhibition with both of the artists, Robert Ibarra and Cesar Piedra, and we're going to film an interview with them and a gallery tour, and it will be, the interviewee is Stephen Reid. So welcome all and thank you for watching.
Hi, Robert.
Hello.
Congratulations on your show here.
Thank you.
So I was just wanted to ask you a couple questions, but I thought I might start with several years back, Paul Baker Prindle curated an exhibit for us, and it was titled Making a Mark. And he was asked to curate some artwork from past fellowship recipients for the Nevada Arts Council, and primarily around mark making. And in that gallery notes, the essay that he had written, he wrote, "At its simplest, the human-made mark is an index of humans' ability to leave a trace with purpose." And I couldn't help but think of that line when I was looking at your work. So I was going to ask you, why do you think you've chose drawing to convey your ideas or your concepts?
Yeah, well, I really like how you explained it in your explanation, where you talked about leaving a trace with purpose. My drawings come from a very personal place, and for me, the drawing is, I chose drawing because it is like just a very immediate form of making, like similar to how we take notes really quickly for stuff we don't want to forget.
Correct.
Sometimes I have this idea in my head or a certain emotion, and sometimes I just quickly want to go to the sketchbook or straight to the actual piece and just start making those marks. So markings with intention, that's very important.
So also, I was kind of looking at the panel over there for the website, and in that panel you talk about some of the struggles that you've had with ADD, those types of issues, and those can kind of lend itself where you can be impulsive, or there's an immediacy sometimes to ADD. And I didn't know if that, maybe some of the drawing, the process of drawing helps with that, or if there was something that was more complicated, if that would be more difficult for you.
Right. Well, for me, I would say that portraying my struggles through the process of drawing is more of just finding a creative outlet for myself. I've always been someone who's been very to themselves as they grew up and didn't really know how to communicate the issues that I grew up with. And so through my art, through drawing, that's kind of how I found that. And yeah, it's just a creative outlet for me to be vulnerable and to try to help my viewers be vulnerable within themselves and to be more comfortable with talking about their own struggles as well.
Right, and this is something that I can relate to. I mean, I think I've struggled with ADD my whole life, and I think when I was reading your panel, you were talking about making yourself vulnerable, which is not easy for somebody, first of all, who's an introvert and who's struggling with ADD. But how is that process, do you think, being vulnerable and through your drawing, how that's helped you, I think, maybe move forward, maybe with some of those things? Yeah.
So, like you said, being vulnerable is not easy, especially for someone who is mostly to themselves. But I think my artwork over time has been this like gradual move towards the personal experience. And even my professors over the years were noticing that it's like you're scratching at the surface, but there's something underneath that we can see that you're trying to get to. And this is what it was. It was me finally finding that courage to just be open to, talk about these issues, because I've been hinting of these ideas for so long, and then my professors were like, just go for it. And I'm very appreciative that I've had a lot of professors who pushed me like that, because now I'm to that point now where I can talk about these issues and I'm comfortable with it.
Right.
and now I'm trying to help others do the same for themselves.
Excellent. That's excellent. And I was also thinking that this is such a mark making and drawing has been around for millennia.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if that kind of history resonates with you, or the ancient kind of form of mark making in your process.
Yeah, I did a lot of research in terms of the history of drawing. And obviously drawing has been a thing since the cavemen. And so drawing has an interesting history because it's always been valued as this like preliminary tool to other mediums such as sculpture and painting. And then it was also highly valued during the Italian Renaissance. But one thing about drawing is that it was always seen as a preliminary tool. So it kind of never got the recognition it deserved as its own art medium because it was always seen as like the before the final product.
Correct.
And so I also read this one article that talked about how more towards the end of the 20th century, artists working drawings and sketchings became a lot more popular because they put the viewer more in touch with how an artist thinks and feels. And so I just loved that because I feel like it talks a lot to like the rawness and the realness of the work of just, putting that charcoal or that pen or that pencil to paper and just letting the emotions run wild.
Excellent. So here we are in front of a couple of self-portraits of you, of your work. So I was reminded about the genre of self-portraits through art history. Mm-hmm. And we talked about the ancientness of mark making. Self-portraits are almost as old as Van Gogh, Rembrandt, Gauguin, Kahlo, Francis Bacon, which we'll talk about that in a second. And more kind of recently in contemporary art, Cindy Sherman, Jenny Saville, Chuck Close, right? So self-portraits have been around forever. So I was wondering if there was something particular about self-portraits that was significant for you in like visualizing your ideas.
Yeah. Well, the self-portrait and the human figure in general has always been the primary subject matter of my work. In the past, I've used the portraits to depict the physical characteristics and personalities of friends and family members that I would draw. And then more recently, now I use the self-portrait in order to create an emotional connection with my viewer. So it ties back to the very personal and emotional aspect of my work. And going back through history, like you were saying about the self-portrait, as I was researching other artists that utilize the self-portrait, I connected a lot with artists such as Francis Bacon and Philip Guston, who, even though they were artists during 20th century modernism, which was dominated by abstraction, they never fully abandoned the human face in form, and they used it a lot to talk about personal hardship. And then you also mentioned Jenny Saville. She also happens to be a huge inspiration for my work.
Right.
Her work is just so profound and very intense and emotional, and she's just a huge influence as well.
Right. So abstraction, you mentioned. I was kind of looking at the kind of the body of work that you have in here, and I'm sure people will see the different photographs of the work or the images of the work through the video. But when we're looking at this piece here, and I think we had mentioned that when I originally looked at this piece, right, this was my least favorite in the exhibit, and I just kind of really didn't think much about it. Mm-hmm. But sitting with it for a few minutes, and after writing my questions out and having written Bacon's name on my paper, it immediately hit me of some of the work that Bacon had done, and the subtlety of the face within this image is really, really striking, I think, and quite lovely. So is there, when you're in the drawing process, is there something that prompts you to determine how real or abstract you want the work to be?
Well, I feel like
Or does that happen at the beginning, right? Do you know it's going to be this abstract when you start, or how does that evolve, I guess, through your process?
Well, when I first come up with like my sketches, I develop a rough idea in my head of what I imagine the work coming out as, but a lot of the times, a lot changes in the middle of it. A lot of the times, I'm like, okay, this is how it's gonna look, and then I just start working on the actual piece. But then I go back and I think about, what's the purpose behind the piece? What am I trying to convey to my viewer? What are the emotions behind it? And then that, a lot of the times, constitutes the mark making. So sometimes they're a little bit more controlled, and other times they're just straight up chaotic. And so
Right.
I think it's a working process throughout, like all the way to the end. I can always have an idea to begin with, but
Right.
it changes a lot right to like the last mark.
Right. And is the viewer constantly on your mind when you're making, or is the kind of a viewer an afterthought?
I think I'm always considering the viewer in every step of the way, because I am doing this partially for myself to be able to, finally release all these struggles and talk about them. But I'm also doing it for the viewer who have their own struggles and struggle with talking about it and being more open about it. And so, with me being vulnerable, I hope that it can help them be more vulnerable themselves and realize that vulnerability should be seen as a strength and not a weakness.
Correct. Great. That's great. So this is one of your larger pieces in here, which is really quite lovely as well. So I was wondering, some of these images you alter and some you don't. So I was kind of curious what led you to start altering the drawings, and what does that really add to the narrative of the drawing? Right? There's a pensive, kind of a longing look here, and it's a fractured image of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of tugging of the hands. So it evokes a lot of emotion, at least for me. So I didn't know, maybe talk about the kind of cubism aspect
Mm-hmm.
of it. There's a bit of a cubism
Yeah.
aspect of it, so I was kind of curious about those things.
Yeah. Well, a few years ago, I started introducing more abstract qualities in my work, such as overlapping images, creating movement, things like that, duplication. And one of my professors at the time noticed what I was doing, and he was like, well, this kind of looks like cubism. And that, like, a light bulb went off in my head after that, and I was like, you're right. And so I decided to embrace that resemblance and go with it, because it kind of happened naturally. And so I did a lot of 2D work at first that had the cubist kind of aesthetic to it. And then I wanted to see how I could take that further by moving from the 2D to slightly 3-dimensional and sculptural, but still within a frame. And so I first drew the piece and then created mock-ups on how I wanted to go about cutting it up. And so when I was thinking about cutting it up, I thought about, how does it better convey the message?
Right.
And so the figure is shown reaching out, and then how it's cut up is that the hand is most at the forefront, while everything else kind of recedes back.
Right.
So playing with that 3-dimensional and
Right.
perspective aspect.
Yeah, a physical foreshortening almost.
Yeah.
Coming at the viewer.
Yeah, and then a lot of it is also emphasizing the emotional aspect of the work. So that's another reason why I wanted to push that kind of cubist influence to see, how can I further emphasize the message, the emotion behind the piece, and the figure breaking out of the frame seems very, very intense.
Right. Well, I like conceptually for me, there was when we talk about cubism, there was a kind of a literally unfolding of a 3D object into a 2D plane.
Right.
Right? And so it felt like there was conceptually or emotionally an unfolding of the figure, right? Reaching out into space, not only physically, but emotionally as well, which was kind of interesting to me. Let's just talk about the charcoal for a moment.
Okay.
Is there a reason why you've worked with charcoal, or is there something about charcoal that maybe lends itself to this type of drawing that you're trying to convey over something else?
Yeah. Well, with this piece specifically, the whole idea behind it was dealing with aspects of my past. And so this piece was actually a response piece to a drawing that I made a few years ago that was titled So Far Gone. And so that piece was a similar composition to this one, to where I portrayed myself reaching out of the composition, but I was, the whole background was kind of darkened in, and I was kind of being like consumed by the darkness. And it kind of spoke on my struggles with letting go of the past, essentially. And so this piece was a response piece to that, to where the figure is still shown reaching out of the composition, but what's holding him back now is a cluster of hands that represent what I'm better off without. And so rendering those hands in very light graphite gives the hands kind of a ghostly feeling, and shows that it represents the past, and that I'm better off without these things that I've been struggling with.
That's excellent. Well, thank you for talking about your work. I appreciate it. And hi, Cesar. Thank you for being here today. Congratulations on your show.
Thanks.
Your exhibit. So I just wanted to ask a couple questions. These are kind of beautiful textiles. So I was just wondering how being a first-generation American maybe influences the work we see in this show.
Right. Well, kind of helps me develop a narrative of like being in the space between being Mexican and being American, and being dismissed by both of those like cultures, because I was born in the States, so I'm a gringo by Mexican terms, and then I'm brown skinned, so
right.
You're not an American or a conventional American.
Right.
So that helps me like navigate into this weird middle ground of being, hey, I'm an amalgamation of both of these things, and figuring out that like complicated history and that I guess duality within my upbringing and my experiences in life allow me to figure out, or my experiences as a Mexican American.
Right, yeah. Right. That's great. And I was wondering, because you spent most of your life here,
yeah.
Right, in Northern Nevada in Reno.
Sure.
So I was wondering if it's like more important or easier to maybe manifest your ideas through this present culture that you're in, or kind of examining maybe your parents' heritage in Mexico, or is like you probably just mentioned, that's amalgamation of maybe of both.
Yeah.
So I didn't know, maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Growing up, especially up in Reno, Nevada, like, and then being born in LA and experiencing life through there, there's a very different culture shock, or at least coming back up to the mountains or whatever, and not knowing that culture, not being educated on that culture.
Right.
It was really something that I wanted and didn't get to do until I was like in early years of college. And as soon as I opened the book about the Aztecs, I was like, okay, I'm in. Let's do this. Let's do a deep dive. And I was enamored with the color, the ritual, like the mythologies, all these like wonderful stories and history of this culture that I descend from, but just had no connections to being brought up and assimilating into like the American culture. And so with my work, I do blend pop American culture with like this ancient post-classic Mesoamerican culture to kind of drive it where I'm at. I know that I descend from these people, these cultures,
right.
But then I also am a contemporary person, so I find similarities within the iconography in our contemporary culture. Like for this piece, it's called Caninos Canijos, and it translates to like troublesome canines or mischievous canines. And it's a Xoloscuincle, a Mexican hairless dog, and a coyote. And you know, it's
I'm sorry, what was this one called?
a Xoloscuincle.
And it's a hairless dog?
Yeah.
Oh, that's,
And you know, they in Mexica beliefs, they guide the souls of the dead to the land of the dead. And so they're held up as, you know, like they're an Aztec Mexica breed dog native to the Americas. And for this piece, I wanted to do like an homage to one of the codices that I love, and it's called the Codex Borgia. And it depicts, you know, like calendars and these ritual images with gods and offerings. And this one is specific is a plate of Quetzalcoatl and the god of death, Mictlantecutli. And they're standing back to back, and their duality within that story is, you know, a life and death. And their myth is Quetzalcoatl goes to the land of the dead, gathers the bones to make man, and the god of death allows him to do it and kind of tricks him, and he like falls, gets scared by some quail, drops the bones, has to gather him up to make man. And since these, you know, canids are very important in the Mesoamerican Mexica world, I kind of figure that I learned that they're still important for like a contemporary Mexican person. We still regard the Xoloscuincle as that animal that guides the souls of the dead to the land of the dead, and then coyotes transport people, because they're human traffickers, into the States, you know, so it's like
yeah.
bringing them into another life.
Right.
And we have decided to do some Aztec Mexica iconographies on the left side, and some of my own personal iconographies of being in LA, and, you know, through the stories of my parents' experiences of immigrating to the U.S. and that's
fantastic. These are so. Is this format with the iconography here? Was that something? So we have some dots down here, which I'm not sure what they reference, but I get the iconography, but I didn't know if the format was something that is within the Aztec culture or something of that nature.
In the Codex Borgia, there are this iconography is there, and they're usually marked for days. So it would be like one flint, and then skull, cactus, flower, movement, jaguar, and you know, each of those symbols was a day in the calendar.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So this piece here, could you possibly pronounce it for me?
It's titled Coalique Transformed.
Coalique Transformed. So it's a beautiful, really textured and visceral kind of piece with different materials that you're using. The slip casting ceramic here, and the felt within here. So I was kind of curious about materials because I'm a fan of felt or felted wool, because I was a fan of Joseph Beuys through college, and he used felt for different reasons. He was a bit of a shaman, and so felt became his reoccurring theme. So I didn't know if there was anything maybe within this material that you're bringing to the work that has that kind of maybe conceptual nature or background for the piece.
It's not as intense as Joseph Beuys' use of materials, but you know, it kind of serves a different language for me. You know, as a ceramicist, you're kind of expected to do pots or sculpture, and I just kind of wanted to subvert those expectations, just expectations in general about like what materials I should be using. I really wanted this conversation between the hard and the soft, because in, you know, some of the tile pieces that I have here, there's a lot of construction materials, and you know, my dad's a construction worker, so I was used to these materials, the drywall, the concrete, the grout, and I never really like dove into like a softer sculpture material. My mom knits, she sews, and whenever we had like my aunts come over, they would like give us these gifts that they would make with felt, with cotton, and it was just something that I could never understood as a material, because you know, it was crafty, it was kitschy, and so I guess a big part of school is to challenge your thought process and the things that you learn. So
Right.
I took a gender and art history course, and I learned about the Bayou Tapestries, how it was made by a collective of women, and I wanted to make something that wasn't so hard-edged or expected of a man, or Mexican Hispanic man, to do. So that's why I kind of moved on to the felt, and I also just really wanted to get a different texture, even though it was, you know, soft.
That's so within the culture of textiles, which I'm not within the maybe the Aztec or Mexican heritage. Is it predominantly a gendered kind of field, working with textiles?
I would safely assume that maybe yes. I know that, you know, tapestries don't survive those years in that climate. Like, I know Mayan,
Right.
there's like very little artifacts left of that time, and then also I can see, you know, during the conquest, post-conquest, textiles being lost, being burned, and the things that survive are like terracotta, obsidian,
Right.
Precious materials
Right.
that, you know, you can't be melted down, but are worth something. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Right. Yeah. No. That's awesome. And within this this wonderful kind of motif, there is some iconography within this as well. I don't know if there's significance with maybe I don't know if that's a prickly pear cactus.
Yeah.
So maybe you can talk maybe about some of the iconography or
For sure.
kind of what's going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, this is obviously the Virgin of Guadalupe, or the Virgin Mary, but it's not. It's Coatlicue, the Mexican goddess and the mother of the patron saint, god of the Aztecs, Huitzilopochtli, the god of war. And I wanted to, you know, learn about this iconography that's very much in this middle ground that I feel that my work is and who I am. And it's a Christian invention with some Mesoamerican religious importance. And so I wanted to make her Coatlicue in this figure, beautiful. The original depiction is this gigantic basalt sculpture of a headless goddess that has hands and hearts as a necklace, and the snakes are her skirt, and we'll put snakes here. And just to kind of hit on that motif of, yeah, this is a Mesoamerican iconography, is the prickly pear cactus. It's on the Mexican flag. It has ties to the origin story of the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, where the eagle has the snake on the cactus, which is where they settled their city.
Right.
And then we also have ceramic components of reciprocity. That's kind of like one of the major tenets of the Aztec religion was, you know, we always hear about sacrifice and that's about it. It's just like, oh, you guys are killing
Correct.
human. No, but
Correct. Right.
it's this ceremony that made sure that the world didn't get destroyed, the existence in the universe was, kept going. And so they would sacrifice war captives, and these flint knives they used the flint knives called the tepactol, and the blood that would fall on them would be eaten,
Right,
and then it
right.
would be the life force that feeds the gods, and so that maintained the world in existence.
Right.
And I've, you know, appropriated them as a symbol for reciprocity, and yeah.
Well, we talked about this because your description right there of that ritualistic kind of difficult and kind of horrific scene,
Right.
juxtaposed with this really lovely kind of image. I love that kind of the duality of what the underpinnings, the conceptual underpinnings of this.
For sure.
So it's really quite lovely. So the title of this piece is
Quaddle,
which means
snake.
snake.
Yeah.
So this piece was interesting to me, but it seemed a little different than the other pieces. There's familiarity here with me with construction materials, the stucco, which a lot of houses in the Southwest are covered in, and these kind of wonderful ceramic tiles. So there is this kind of sense of something more familiar, maybe in an architectural sense versus a textile sense.
Right.
So can you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I remember when we first moved to Reno, my dad would take me with him on construction sites to clean up drywall that was like on the floor. It was one of the things I just like toss them out the window, watch them splat as I would miss them going into like the garbage bin. And I saw him like repair our bathroom one time, and he had made all these like red marks where he was gonna put nails or the pipe or something. And I kind of looked at him and I'm like, hey, my dad's an artist. And working on these tiles, getting the smell like the concrete just constantly striking, the Hardy backer board to get it to split, kind of brought those memories back of like being in like these dusty rooms and soon to be apartments with my dad, and just having to do that with him for a couple weeks out of the year. And I, wanted to step a little bit out of my comfort zone with the ceramics, so I started making tiles. And I'm not the best painter, or I can't draw to save my life, but I decided, I used to make stencils and stuff when I was a kid, so I just did this snake, this quaddle, and it's one of those kind of like stereotypical iconography that young Latinx, Chicano, Hispanic people looking back at history, learning about the culture do, and you see it represented everywhere. It's on stickers, it's on t-shirts, kind of like the Virgin of Guadalupe. And tying that in with like the stereotypical job for a Mexican man kind of just made sense. It was also inspired by Helen Escobedo. She made this gigantic sculptural, like it's like a prism that ranges from red to yellow, and there's like some orange in the middle, and it's just like these squares, and then they're on concrete blocks, and the idea of the snake being these metal rebar, this metal rebar prism.
Oh, that's excellent. So let's talk about, just for a second, because we were talking about your dad, working with your dad, and in the construction field, and your dad is an immigrant from Mexico, right? And so we were talking about, in the other piece, we were talking about sacrifice, right? More of an actual human sacrifice. But there's other types of sacrifice, right, that you're interested in, I think, as a Mexican American, and seeing the immigrant story firsthand from your family, right? What other types of sacrifice maybe have you seen maybe with your family?
Yeah, I think it's it's definitely a big thing, translating this literal sacrifice from the past to more contemporary sacrifice. It's still there. We're just no longer sacrificing individuals, we're sacrificing ourselves. We sacrifice moving to a different country, not knowing what's going to happen. You're leaving your family behind. You are sacrificing to give new opportunities in life to your offspring or whatever. So it's like something that my parents, I got to see them do, and something that I'm grateful for them doing. They sacrifice their bodies at these like labor-intensive jobs, and sacrificing having things to do. Like maybe sometimes you won't be able to have any fun doing something, but at least you have a roof over your head and food in your stomach. Like, it definitely is something that I've noted, especially with these times, just like seeing how my dad works himself, and how I've how I've also inherited that like notion of working, and like just having my practice in general. Like I overwork myself to get to these like complex ideas. I think the challenging myself and learning from not just books, but then also the action of making the work, seeing how different materials kind of respond to each other. Like the softness of these tiles with like the roughness of it. You mentioned stucco in the past. People were like, hey, this looks like an address plate. And I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. Like if you can identify with these, that's great. I want to make work that is about those connections. Like the laborers, the people that have these materials, but can't see them in or don't know how to approach them in like an art sense.
Right, and have you maybe, you may have gotten feedback, but I don't know if there's any intentionality in this work being maybe social or kind of political that you think about when you're making this work?
Not at all. I have been approached about it, and it's one of those things where I educate myself in these ways, and I want to communicate these ideas. So yes, like I can see like my work being taken as having some political action, having some activism intent with it. I honestly like. It's hard to want to make work and then say, oh, this stands for this, because as I'm working, I have a conversation or ask myself a question, and it shifts. So I the end result isn't what my intention. So you know, it's one of those things that's always up to interpretation. But yeah, I have heard like that political stuff in the past, and it's just coupled with this complex identity of being of two cultures and being in the middle of it. You have all this complicated history that you want to talk about, and it kind of gets pushed under the rug because it's like not the time. But so it's hard to want to keep it under the rug. Like if I can make this beautiful work with this pointed stuff, like I'm gonna do it. And also I think researching and finding this duality and this like similarities between contemporary objects, more Western objects, iconography, and like ancient post-classic Mesoamerican iconographies, and say, hey, look, we're not so different, and you know, yeah.
Well, that's excellent. Hey, man, well, I thank you for your time and the discussion of the work.
Thank you so much.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
I also want to say thank you to Stephen Reid for conducting the interview with Robert and Cesar. You did a beautiful job, and it's wonderful to have your help with Nevada Neighbors Talk. And you did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all that the Capital City Arts Initiative does in the state and within Carson City as well. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much to Cesar, Piedra, Robert Ibarra, and Stephen Reid for doing this Nevada Neighbors Talk in here in the Two Views exhibition. We're delighted. Part of the exhibition is a commissioned essay, and this one was written by Vivian Zavataro, and there are handouts in the gallery, and it is also available online on our website. So thank you so much to our artists, to our funders, all of whom will be listed on the slide immediately following this. Thank you all. Enjoy.